Thank you.
Open a transparent meeting, no hush.
Let's,
Okay, we're live. We would welcome to the joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the Design Review Committee. And the Planning Commission Chair will call the meeting to order.
Okay, it's 5:01 on February 17th. This meeting is called to order. Shall we proceed with roll call, please?
Committee member, Planning Commissioner Jameson.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Gold.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Peterson.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Rodriguez.
Present.
Chair Williams.
Here.
Committee member Jacobson Bates.
Here.
Committee member Cully. Absent. Committee member Deputy.
Here.
Committee member Dryden Hess. Absent. Chair Kavanaugh.
Present.
Okay, shall we do the Pledge of Allegiance? Justin, would you like to
Yes.
lead
Place
us?
your hand over your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so our main business item tonight is to go over the things that the Planning Commission has been working on for the last couple of months, and the Design Review Committee had worked on it prior to that. So we just wanted to make sure, the Planning Commission wanted to make sure that the Design Review Committee has reviewed the updates that we've done and suggested. See if you have anything extra that you'd like to add, or if we can just go ahead and approve as is. And I don't know if there's any further comments from the Planning Commission or not. Joni?
Yeah, I have a comment. Having sat on the city council for a number of years and seeing what their agendas are like right now, tend to be very long and late meetings, I would recommend that instead of belaboring them with the possible examination of things that are not necessarily happily received by the applicants, that we do that through the Planning Commission, instead of having it go directly to the City Council.
I'm not sure we can do that. I think since we're changing city regulations, I think it has to be approved by the City Council, and we just recommend the changes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chelsea?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So to make an amendment to the municipal code, the Planning Commission, and specifically Title 11, the Planning Commission needs to provide recommendations, but generally amendments to the municipal code have to be approved by the City Council. But I think perhaps Commissioner was speaking to the appeals process.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and that maybe appeals of the Design Review Committee should be going to the Planning Commission versus the City Council, which to remind everyone that under the current code, there is some language, most of the things that the DRC and the Planning Commission do are appealed to the City Council. There's a general section in Title 11 that deals with appeals, and it sets out that there's some decisions at the staff level that are appealed to the Planning Commission. Other than that, all decisions of the commission or the committee are appealed to City Council. There were some inconsistent provisions throughout Title 11 that said appeals of certain Design Review Committee decisions would be appealed to the Planning Commission pursuant to, and then it cited a section of the code that deals with the procedures for the City Council to hear an appeal. So the changes that we've put forward that, we haven't discussed them at the last hearing. That wasn't an issue that came up, but at the when we initially brought this forward, the discussion there was that those are really, the planning commission references seem to be out of place and inconsistent with the rest of the code. And so we're trying to clean that up and make it clear everywhere that the appeals would be going to city council. To recommend that appeals of the design review committee, appeals of decisions of the design review committee first go through the planning commission would be a change from the current setup. As the two bodies are established in the code, they're not hierarchical to each other. The planning commission and the design review committee are two bodies that have separate purviews, but the planning commission is not set up as an appellate body to the design review committee. Certainly you can recommend that, but that I just want to make it clear that it would be a change from how it currently is set up under the code, and the amendments that we're talking about are really language cleanup because the current language is inconsistent, and we think staff's review determined that the references to planning commission were in error.
Okay, so if the city council wanted to have it where the DRC appeals would go through the planning commission, they could do that. They don't have to accept our recommendation.
Yes, that's correct. Either way you recommended it, the city council has the final say.
So, any other comments from the?
I just brought it up because somebody asked me to, so I did it. And actually, I think it might be good, just having sat there on the council for 10 years or whatever, and having to listen to appeals. We never listened to an appeal, ever. It went to the planning commission. There was this appeal on the sign. So, and then if they did,
and I think that
if-
was because the way the VAR was
Right,
structured at
right,
the time, and
right.
things are different now.
Right. So,
But correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like some things are appealed to the planning commission under the current, the new that we're proposing, and some go straight to city council, or am I wrong?
Yeah, you're right.
So I think we're conflating an appeal versus a tiered review. So under the current code and under the code as would be amended in the staff report, there are certain planning staff level decisions that are appealable to the planning commission. That would not change. Under the current code, putting aside the errors that we are trying to correct, we think the code as of now provides all appeals of DRC final decisions go to the city council. There's just some errant language and errant references to the planning commission, but really it's citing a provision in the code that deals with city council appeals. If the changes that are being recommended are recommended, if you recommend those to city council and they're ultimately adopted, it won't change the appeal procedures, other than fixing the language, those errant references to planning commission, but it will set up a process by which if an application comes in and has a design review committee component, but also, for example, needs a development plan that would normally go to the planning commission, now the code will specify how the design review committee will review the project, make recommendations to the planning commission on their pieces of the project, and then the planning commission will make the final decision on the overall application or the development plan and all the other aspects, including the pieces that the DRC reviews. But that is not, that's all happening pre-final decision. So that's not an appeals process. That's just a ordering of permitting decisions.
Okay.
It seems like the change came about because us on the planning commission meet once a month, sometimes once every 2 months, and that the city council meets every 2 weeks. Therefore, if something came, a sign, they would come to us on an appeal, and we didn't meet for March or April, but they're meeting every 2 weeks, and the guy's going, or the gal's going, can we get on with this? And they gotta sit back and wait on a sign appeal, let's just say a color or something. I'm trying to remember why it got streamlined that way. It didn't used to be that way, but a couple of years ago it got changed, maybe for that. But some of the items do get appealed to us, to the
Yes.
planning commission, as laid out here.
Yeah, I don't remember where it is, but
So
Yes.
if the planning commission has a involvement in the process that comes after the DRC, then the appeal comes to planning.
Right.
But if it's a DRC solely
Only,
decision-making
then it
body,
goes up, it goes up,
yeah,
right.
and,
If I can jump in, I think I think there might be some confusion. So there's the appeal process after a final decision on a permit or application is made, and let's say it was denied, and the applicant is unhappy with that, and they appeal the decision. That's one thing. Those are going to city council, other than a few planning to staff level decisions that would go to the planning commission before going to city council. Separately, before a final decision on a project is made, the DRC might make some decisions and be final, and those would be appealed to the city council, or the DRC is making recommendations to the planning commission, because the planning commission has other aspects of the project to approve, in which case the DRC makes recommendations, the planning commission makes the final decision on the project, and then that final decision, including something that's based on the recommendation of the DRC, would be appealed to city council.
I don't think that's what it says.
I'm not sure. I know we're trying to streamline things, I know that, I'm hoping that's what it says.
that was my understanding, and I kind of, I get what Joni's saying, but given as she said, they're not kind of hierarchical organizations, so the planning commission doesn't have the final say in subject matters unrelated to your, responsibilities, i.e. signs.
Cover the building.
Yeah, so that's what goes back to potentially the city council. So I get where you're coming from, and yet it makes sense to me the way it's written. And that was what my understanding of it was.
Okay.
So most of it goes, there's very few things that are strictly the purview of our committee, that don't also go as a
Touchy.
recommendation to you, and your committee.
Yeah. Under this, the
Under these-
process reflected in the amendment.
Yeah.
And you guys are good with that?
We are good with it, and we actually
I am.
take some
Push.
credit for starting the
Okay.
ball rolling in a way,
Yeah.
because we realize, as you do, that sometimes the applicants are frustrated, it takes longer than it ought to take, because we end up in a do loop,
Yeah.
You keep on going through it. So we, I think at our September meeting, we initiated a request that let's look at ways in which we can streamline the process. And if that meant that we basically, that our decision isn't appealable, it goes to you, and then your decision, to the extent it reflects what we've said, would be subject to appeal at that point. But we're fine with that, because it results in that streamlining process, which we think helps us all, helps staff too. So I have one question, it's a case of first impression, but I'm looking through the code again, that was distributed, and I appreciate putting the materials together. It came up, I think actually in discussion at the planning commission, because the history is, and many of you here were in the city at the time perhaps that the design review standards were adopted in 1980. And I'm on page, well, again, depending on the number system, it's either page 135 or 165, depending on whatever you're using, but it's the duties and responsibilities of the design review committee have responsibilities for developing aesthetic standards and or requirements for properties within the village area of the city. That's essentially the design review standards that have been in place there. Those were approved by the city council, as I understand it. And it seems to me,
160.
okay, and the section is 2.4.4, 2-4-4, duties and responsibilities, in chapter 4, title 2 of the design review committee. And it's the first named responsibility is developing aesthetic standards and or requirements for properties within the city area. It doesn't say it has to be approved by the city council, even though the ones we're working on now are, and it hasn't changed since. But I think it ought to say that they are approved by, they should be approved by city council. I'm just suggesting you're from another amendment to the group of amendments that have already been proposed.
And Patrick, on page 45,
Yeah?
it says the exact same thing. I circled that
Oh,
one.
good. Yeah, I know where you, yeah.
And said,
Yeah.
because it says determining design standards, which is our design guidelines, which is the big book. And I'm like, okay, wait, these folks are determining
Without, yeah.
with approval by city council, so they can't be just changed by you five folks. It's gotta go through the process.
We're going to orange neon lights from now on.
Yeah, exactly, and then the things that are flying up in the air, yeah, all the stuff.
Las Vegas!
Right, because, and then this hopefully is gonna get updated,
Updated.
get that through our GPAC and
Right.
through you folks.
Yes.
And then, once it's approved by city council, you folks are determining, does that project meet that,
Adherence.
And I
right?
think because of the GPAC, I think that provides an extra impetus on this amendment
Correct,
to make sure that that is approved by the city council.
right, and not taking anything away from you folks, but I
Oh,
said the
yes,
same
it does.
thing. And I said,
Please.
yeah, get it stamped, approved, and now it's black and white, and then we move forward, and you guys interpret, does it subjectively, does it meet?
Right.
Meet
Yeah.
the standards
Yeah.
approved by the city
As
council.
long as it's not black and white.
Little red and white,
But
red and white.
because we don't want that responsibility, nor should we have that responsibility.
We always
So
want someone to
ultimately-
blame.
Right. Well, your responsibility is to interpret what the city council adopted and
Right.
say it meets.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
and not to have such a broad area for interpretation as these guidelines are honed in with the GPAC. I think it's gonna be a big help for
Right.
this committee for sure, and probably for the planning commission to an extent as well.
We know in our general plan has a seventh element in there, the design element, you know, those of us who sit on it.
Yeah,
And
that's
they
right.
kind of combine it as a design, I don't know how they list it, but it's a little different. I started looking at it, I thought, no, they just broadened it, but they're meaning the same thing in the new GPAC. It seems to me
Yeah.
that we're gonna have that element, a design element that will be adopted by everybody, including these folks, city council, and then you folks interpret it. And they appeal to city council or to us when it's the big roofs and all the other things, not the little signs and the colors.
Yeah,
So is the proper place to address this in the section on page 45 under the duties of the DRC? Or on 165 and revise it there?
It's kind of like
I would-
It has to be
Both.
both.
both,
yeah,
consistent.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick caught 165, I
Yeah.
caught 145, I didn't even circle
Yeah, you're right.
165.
They speak to
But
both.
it's in both, yeah. Just to be for consistency.
Counselor, is that,
Yeah, so that would be, there's two, as I see it, there's two places in section 2-4-4, point A. That would be subsection 1, where it says developing aesthetic standards. You should add, approved by city council. And then in that same section, but subsection 8 on the next page, where it says they starts with determining design standards, we would also put approved by city council in that subsection.
Yep.
Is that what I'm hearing the
Yes.
consensus is?
Should cover it.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, Yes,
Okay,
I think that's
Good.
fine, and we can, I've made a note of it, so when we get to the end, we can, make sure to capture that in the recommendations to city council.
okay. So backing up just a little bit, looking at Appendix A, I'm not sure how much involvement the DRC has, and, you know, we've spent 2 months on that. So are there any further questions on the planning commission on changes there?
Could you reference the page, Jack?
And if I could preface
Page.
this part of the discussion
starts
a little
on-
bit. So I think the only difference between
10.
what the planning commission reviewed at its last meeting and what is before you now is that, based on your recommendation, we've gone through and cleaned up, streamlined references to planning manager's designee. So now that is included in the definition of planning manager, and all references to planning manager designee throughout the Title 11 have been removed. So it just says planning manager, but by definition, that can include the designee. Other than that, the changes are the recommended code changes are as you reviewed them on February 7th. As far as this piece is more of a planning commission piece, because it's the reason why it's before you is simply because the edits are affecting Title 11 and pursuant to the government code and the city's municipal code. The planning commission has to review and provide recommendations to city council on any changes to the zoning code. So the Appendix A is definitely more for the planning commission's review, and it's just a slight change from what you've previously looked at.
Right, and there's one that I think you missed on page 35.
Don't say that.
Definition of manager. It refers to section 213 of this code, or designee of the planning manager. So
Okay, yeah,
the or
that's
should be
another-
taken out.
Yes, I can take that
That's true.
out. It is duplicative now. Thank you for catching that.
And that was actually
Well-
the only thing I saw that I thought needed to be addressed in A.
You know, and the only thing in that same section A, and this again is just us planning commissioners, which we reviewed extensively at that last meeting, was it was the development plan. If you're under 300 square feet, you can do it every 2 years, and then we talked about is a lifetime or 10 years of time. You guys came up with lifetime, great. I'm fine with that. Does it get recorded against the property? Who tracks it? I mean, I'm just, again, you know, I've just seen so many projects, and then we change personnel as their files. I mean, and this, I don't have an answer for it. I don't know how you do that, but it's a pretty big deal that somebody comes in under 300 square feet, and every 2 years they can do it, but the lifetime you can only do it up to 1,500 square feet. How do we track that from a practical standpoint? And maybe this is not the forum to talk about it, but I'm just trying to think about a planning director, as example, is gone. We have a city manager who is up to here with everything she does, which we appreciate, but how do we track that? Is it something to be recorded that you got it once, twice, and that's it, or do you just let it fly? I don't have an answer, I'm just asking.
Just as a practical matter,
Yeah.
each property has its own file. We have a paper file and an electronic file. So everything for that APN, whatever that may be, even business licenses, code enforcement, everything is attached to that APN.
Okay,
So whenever staff reviews applications, they can go into the system and look at every action that has been taken on that property.
okay, that answers it. So you've got the file system there. And I only bring it up because we've had, not under your reign at all, ways back, where we've got things that are supposed to be recorded on parking, and they're supposed to have kept that lot as parking, and then they sell both lots, and the parking goes away, and this Frederick's Court, it's Par Building, it's the one over on the corner on Atterdag,
nobody tracked it. It has no blame of current anybody. It happened way before anybody's time in this room. Although Jody and I probably are blamed because we were still on stuff. But you just slipped through the cracks again, and those are big deals. So hopefully we just get a little bit better on that, but that's more housekeeping than it is substantive.
Great comments, thank you.
Okay, so, let's just,
So, Chair, we need to remember to open up the public comment if there's any.
yeah, just, I'm trying to think what the best way to do this.
So what we would need you to do, we only need an action from the planning commission tonight. And what you would be doing is adopting the resolution, which is included on page 58. And we can incorporate the additional changes.
Yeah, I'd like to, you know, I don't know if it's, make a motion, I'll discuss what I'd like. And that is, to have the resolution reflect that the, design review committee, I mean, it reflects that we participated in the review, but that the design review committee, that requires us to take a vote, I think, supported the amendments.
Okay, well, let's go to public comment,
Okay,
and then we can bring it back and we can discuss things like that.
okay, great, yeah.
Okay. So with that, we'll open it to public comment. Is there anybody that would like to speak on these items? Anybody online?
I think I have one hand raised. Nancy?
We can't hear her.
Can't hear you, you're on mute?
Just gotta unmute yourself.
You're still on mute. There you go.
She's still on
I
the.
think she hit it again.
You're on mute.
Nancy, you were unmuted for a second and then you went back onto mute.
No?
I still can't hear you.
We're sure it's her?
Lower left corner.
Are you able to unmute?
There,
Yeah.
Okay.
now I'm in.
You can hear you.
Okay.
Huh? First of all, I just want to say to Chelsea that this is a tremendous job that you've undertaken, and it's not easy work, and I appreciate it. Also, I'm delighted that the board and the committee and the commission and the DRC are meeting together. I think that's a really good way to get to the end of this. All of my comments have to do with the information about the description of the planning commission or the design review committee. And I don't know if Anne Marie was able to get you a copy of that work or not.
No?
Nancy, I'm not
Okay,
sure we.
Then I have page and chapter and line, and I'll start with the one that's most substantive. Page 42, chapter 1, Planning Commission, A11, line 8, where it says the Planning Commission may send it back to the DRC for further work if it's a significant change in the design. And I'm wondering whether that shouldn't say shall. Significant really is a word that has some meaning. And to me, it means that it's not just dotting an I or crossing a T. So I just want to throw that out there for you to think about.
Nancy?
Going on page 43.
Nancy, the committee is trying to follow your comments, so they have a question.
What
Well,
page?
because there's two
42.
sets of agendas and we are not finding,
The numbers got,
it got
Okay.
changed, so what page would this be
It's
on?
page 43 or the first page of attachment B,
I'm
Okay,
Okay.
She said
Oh,
Feb
at the
17th.
very bottom, 11,
Oh,
last
okay.
sentence.
got it.
2148.
Significantly, the very last
right.
Planning
line
Commission
there.
may send
Gotcha.
Okay, go ahead, Nancy.
And what was her question?
Shall, may versus shall,
Oh,
On which item?
at the last line of
Oh,
11.
down here.
Last
Okay.
sentence.
She would like-
Significantly, and then
She wants
where's May?
shall
May's in
instead
there
of
somewhere.
may, she would like.
yes,
The
good.
Planning Commission may send an application to the Design Review Committee for further review when the Planning Commission determines there have been changes significantly affecting the design of the project. So I encourage you to discuss that. Going on to page 43, B line 2, about the Board of Zoning adjustment. This is just a bookkeeping change, an editorial change, but I think that it should say Board of Zoning Adjustment rather than Zoning Board of Adjustment. The official title is Board of Zoning Adjustment. And then on page 43, Design Review Committee, A4, line 2. Right now, it's reading that the Design Review Committee is going to review lighting. My understanding is that the Design Review Committee is interested in exterior lighting and not the interior lighting. And that's a whole big ball of wax, and I don't think they want to go there. So I would recommend putting exterior before lighting so it's clear what you're
It
reviewing.
says that on line.
It was just.
So it says, Nancy, it says exterior architecture of buildings, landscape, and you wanted to say exterior lighting also,
Just
correct?
to make it
Just to
clear.
make it clear.
It says it on line E, any exterior lighting required design review committee under section 11, 12, 18.
She just wanted to add exterior on this one also,
Okay.
or just says lighting.
Oh, it's below. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Well, then it would say it twice, which is
Yeah, it's
good.
just
Yeah.
consistent.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
got it.
On page 43, A6, line 5, both on or for were left in that sentence. And I think you need to decide if you're on or for in terms of the language. I think Chelsea was giving you a choice there.
Ours has 4 crossed off.
Yeah, on the following.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
That is taken
Second
care of.
set of,
yeah.
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 Okay. On page 44, 9,
Pages don't match.
No,
What
no.
page
What
would
page
this
It's
is
be?
gonna be
This
45.
will be on 45
It's
now.
45.
It's one
45,
page up.
section 9 rendering and supplies.
Thank you.
I think I understand the intent of 9, which is to enable specified individuals, planning commission or city council to ask the design review committee for advice. And then it lists 3 specific matters: architecture of buildings, structures, and signs. But it was confusing for me to read this after I had read number 4, which has an extensive list of responsibilities. I have 2 questions. Do you want to limit the request to those 3 matters? And could this item be somewhat reworded and actually be part of 4 rather than being a standalone item? Something like, additionally, the city manager, planning manager, and I'm wondering if you don't want the planning manager in there as well as the city manager. Planning commission or city council may ask the design review committee to render its advice on those 3 specific areas, or if you wanted to broaden it, any of the above. And that's just, a suggestion to give you an idea of what my thinking was about it.
Mhm. And Nancy, if you go to the page before that, number 6, that's what you're probably referencing. It talks about, it lists the landscaping, mobile home, overhang, solar panels, exterior lighting, telecommunications, and then over here it just says the 3. That's what you're,
Well,
Yeah.
there's
I
a
get it.
considerable, there's a considerable list
right,
after 4.
right.
Yeah. This one,
But what's
And then 4
being
has,
said there doesn't include all
tenant
4.
memo specifically.
So it's a decision for you to make, but it seemed to me that it was confusing to go from one to the other. So were you doing, which took precedence,
Mhm.
I guess was my question.
I'm sorry, just on that one, just Chelsea, aren't those speaking to 2 different things, right?
I think so.
Right, I think they are also. I think one is, as it would come forward to the planning commission
In
review.
an application.
In an application, and the other one
the
is
other
as
is-
if, like, they're asking you to render an opinion on something
Right.
that came, I don't know.
Some
how
other
else.
way.
Some other way,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I.
That's right. I guess I'm happy to talk about that more. I would like to let Nancy.
Yeah, no, of course.
have her time to finish her comment.
Thank you.
Okay. Then one more thing, and it may be that I just don't understand what the legal profession does these days. But I was surprised to see that, except in 2 places, nothing was capitalized, and yet there were a lot of proper nouns. City, city council, planning commission, design review committee, general plan, board of zoning adjustment, all of those proper nouns, and referring to specific entities within the city of Solvang. So I wondered about capitalizing them, and I hate to suggest any more work, but it seems to me it's a little easier to read the document if they're capitalized. And but maybe I don't understand something, Chelsea, about the work you do. And I'm just really pleased, having raised the question of the planning commission's description, to see that this document is really very complete in terms of the things you have to do. And one thing that really interests me is that you can be very proactive about suggesting things that should be done, or done in a different way. And I hope you'll really take advantage of that. I haven't looked at the County Planning Commission descriptive language recently, but I know that many, many times one would like them to be able to be more proactive, and I don't think there's the language for them to do that. They're constantly saying that they need to have the Board of Supervisors ask them to do certain kinds of things. So I think that's a very strong part of your description. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Do we have any other comments from the public?
If anybody else would like to make a public comment on this, please raise your hand on Zoom. Seeing none.
Seeing none, let's bring it back for discussion. Somebody wanna start? You have anything to say? Maybe we can, this would be to bring up your point on Nancy's.
Oh,
comment.
yeah, Nancy, I think you understand perfectly. I think you do. You did a great job. I think the recommendations of like capitalization, et cetera, they're defined terms, so I think that makes sense, right? And those things. I just think that between 9, what we're talking about with 9 and, where was the other one?
6.
4
4.
and 6.
Yeah. A4.
are different cases, and so I think Chelsea could expound on why they're different and how they might be more clear to the average reader, I guess, which might be helpful, right? So people are not confused.
And expand upon the limitations in 9 versus the larger description in 4, I guess, too.
Right, yeah.
Why that is.
Happy to. So first on the capitalization, I totally agree that those are proper nouns and normally we would capitalize them throughout the entire code. Defined terms are not capitalized. So that's just consistent with how it is in the code. I would say, you know, we could capitalize them, but I tend to want things to be consistent, and that's just the way it's been drafted. But putting that aside, again, you can certainly recommend capitalization. For sections, again, I'm in section 2-4-4A, and we're talking about subsections 4, 6, and 9. So 4 is to provide authorization for the DRC to render advice to the Planning Commission on the listed items. And then section 6 is related to the DRC's role in reviewing applications. And it lists out the specific places in the code where it says the DRC needs to do something with respect to an application. And those cross-references, the sub little a, b, c, d, etc., that, those sections themselves refer to the DRC, but we wanted to add the reference here so that it makes it easier for someone using the code to, if they want to know what the DRC does, they go to the power and responsibilities section, and then it will refer them to the other sections in the code where the DRC is mentioned as, needing to take action on an application. And then 9 is sort of the reverse. So it's when the city manager, the planning commission, or the city council wants the DRC's input on something that they otherwise might not have been giving advice on. They can request that the DRC provide that advice, and this specifically gives the DRC authority to render advice in those situations. Certainly there's probably places where some of this overlaps a little, but I think it is beneficial to have it in 3 separate sections. I think Nancy has a very good point that 9 lists a smaller set of items for the DRC's review, or for which the DRC can provide advice on, than 4 or 6. As you can see in 9, the list of things is not bolded or underlined, so that's existing language in the code. And as staff was going through this, we were trying to be conservative in our edits, even though it might seem like there's a lot. So we didn't change that current language. However, I think it would be a very reasonable recommendation to make this list in 9 be more comprehensive and say include everything that's in 4. That's certainly something you can recommend. I hope that helps clarify things.
Thank you, Chelsea. Anybody have anything else? Esther, you had.
Yeah, I do, and I think it's here, but I have to admit, I didn't have enough time to make it through all this in the last couple of days. It was just didn't happen. So my question is, and this is maybe a Chelsea question, is there a provision for returning a project to the DRC if what we recommended then goes on to the PC and the PC makes some substantial changes that would affect potentially the DRC's decision? So I believe there's some language, but can you point me towards that, Chelsea, or maybe there isn't, and if so, I would like that to be considered. So.
Yes, it's in section, so the packet that I'm looking at, it's on page 43, but it's section 2-1-4, so it's the planning commission's duties and responsibilities.
Okay, so that is,
Subsection A11.
all right,
That's what Nancy Emerson was talking about, the may and the shall.
right.
It's significant. You said, you didn't use significant. I don't know what you used.
I said substantial.
Substantial.
So, but
And
the
here it
same
says
thing.
significant, and Nancy Emerson's point was, can we make it shall go
Yes.
back to you when we determine it's significant,
I think-
not may?
I think it's not only changes they are changes affecting the design of the project. And I think there are other changes that are significant that may not affect the design.
Correct.
But it is changes that affect the design.
Should
And
go
that's
back to you.
in the language already.
And if you notice, planning commission is capitalized in this section. And design review committee is not. So it does make it clear, and I think Nancy is correct on it, we should, because, and like.
I yield.
On another, some things are capitalized, like tourist-related commercial district is capitalized, so I mean, I think.
We'll be
things were
doing this for
proper.
100 years.
Um,
So did you want that to change to a
The planning
shall?
commission shall send any I do recommend that, application to the design review committee for further review when the planning commission determines changes significantly affecting the design.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Determines changes significantly affect design of the project. In other words, I took a few words out of there too. But yes, I do think that should be included.
That's good.
And this isn't because of this planning commission, because I feel like we've got a great relationship here, and if something took place that made a significant change, you would send that back to us. But this is a document that is used for the future, and we wanna make sure that continues to go that back and forth route the way it needs to. So,
Yep,
Yeah.
when there are significant changes.
When-
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Another 35
Makes
years,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Thanks, Nancy, for catching that.
Yeah.
Sorry I was not up on my homework as well as I would have liked to have been on that.
So have you made a note of that?
Yes,
Change
I
may
have.
to shall?
And I also would like to encourage the planning commission to do what we talked about with that number 9 under 244, that be broadened to include the activities that are in 4,
Yeah.
and just reference that, or maybe even 4 and 6.
I don't see any reason why we shouldn't do that. I think there's a lot of reasons why we should. And Chelsea seemed to agree with that, because she suggested going ahead and doing it. Okay, yes?
Yep, makes sense.
Okay, we'll do that. Anything else?
Is the planning manager comment consistent or redundant? That was the other one on 9 that Nancy noted. Chelsea?
On number 9 for the city manager, because
Yeah.
planning manager would be making that request through city manager. There
Okay.
was one.
Okay.
Can I ask a general question? We're not really looking at tonight, are we? The design, chapter 4, which is entitled the Design Review Committee. Are we looking at that, or is that really just for our reference?
On what page?
That's for the next session.
Say 164, that's for the next
That's for
section.
the next session, but there are
Gotcha.
some amendments affecting that.
Okay,
What's in there in that last part are those sections of the code unamended. And there may be some amendments you're approving that aren't in there yet.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, all
So
right.
that's something to bring up in your
Yes.
In
meeting.
your meeting, okay. Changing it to the manager, not the director, and those kind of things will be caught at some point, so we're consistent, I'm assuming. Okay.
And that part about the developing aesthetic standards and requirements, and then
Yeah.
saying to be.
Same thing,
approved.
city
Yeah.
council.
Right.
That's
Done.
in there
That's, yeah,
without the
yep,
qualification.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, got it. Okay.
if I can inquire, there were 2 other pieces that Ms. Emerson pointed out. One was just fixing some existing code language, but to make it so it's the Board of Zoning Adjustment instead of Zoning Board of Adjustment.
So moved.
If you're okay
Yeah,
with
so
that.
moved. Yeah, sure.
And then the other thing she mentioned was adding exterior lighting to section 2-4-4.
So moved.
A4.
Yep,
If that is,
makes sense.
you all are wanting that.
Exterior, yeah, exterior.
Yes.
Everybody in agreement?
Yes, yes. Makes sense.
Yes.
Yep.
Good suggestions.
And I would also like to point out, I think she is right about the capitalizing of these boards, because on that last sentence where it says planning commission is capitalized, application may send an application to the design review committee. It makes design review committee seem insignificant in that sentence. If it was capitalized, I think it'd just be more eye-catching. It's, oh, they're referring to a board, not just, it's not like a running sentence.
Well, I think that, what I might suggest is that it be consistent, and if all the zoning, all the codes have it being lowercase, then just make everything lowercase. And if it's gonna be, some of it's uppercase, then all of it needs to be for the proper nouns. So it's like one way or the other, but it just needs to be consistent, and sorry, Chelsea.
Yeah, so if I may suggest, the planning commission reference that's capitalized, that is me typing a proper noun and forgetting that I'm trying to mirror what the code should be. But under, as I said before, I think generally, other than a few errant times, the proper nouns like defined terms like planning commission, et cetera, in the code are not capitalized. So I would suggest that we mirror that, because this is not a holistic omnibus update to the code. That's certainly, something that council could decide to do to change to capitalization, but I hesitate to do that in this forum because we are talking, even though there's a lot of changes we're discussing, we are talking about a subset of the code, and I don't want to create more inconsistencies.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would agree with that, since the whole point was to get rid of inconsistencies. So if you make any changes, it would be to put lowercase where you now have uppercase.
Right, and I think some of those are, again, just, I was intending to make it lowercase, but.
Or maybe just
the
leave it
proper
the
noun,
way it
so
is.
I think just consistency.
Yeah.
Well, speaking on just my behalf, I'm endorsing all the changes from my side on the design review committee, and very happy to see this moving forward. Like I said, it sure makes our job much easier to execute, and I think it makes it easier for the applicants too, not just in streamlining the process, but in the clarity of the process.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want individuals. I was going to say it'd be interesting to have some sort of process where I could provide, or where the design review committee had an opportunity to express and share with you its support, or the extent of its support for the amendments as amended, and enable you then to represent the support of the design review committee in the resolution.
To when you go to the city council to have in theory, our full support. I
Yeah,
can't
it says
speak
that
for
you met,
everybody.
it says we discussed, it doesn't say that the design review committee.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we amend the resolution to?
Technically, we can amend that resolution, Chelsea, you agree?
Yes,
Say
yes,
this.
we can certainly, at your direction, amend that resolution to reflect that.
Should it say like in a joint session of the planning commission
Yeah.
and design review committee?
So I think the resolution should still be just the planning commission's decision. However, we can add, at your direction, we could add another whereas clause saying that the design review committee supports the changes, or some, language along those lines. But I think only the planning commission has the legal obligation to provide the recommendations to the city council. So I would suggest that the resolution still be a resolution of the planning commission alone, but we can certainly have the language reflect the DRC's support for the changes.
I think that was it.
Yeah, that's fine, I just need to have a guidance on how I can, you know, what the next step is for us to create, for purposes of the minutes and the resolution, a sense of the design review committee supporting that. Is that a motion that is made now by a member of the design review committee? We take the vote, and then they can incorporate the results in the resolution.
While it's not required, I don't believe there's any harm in you making your remarks and taking a vote, and we'll record it.
Nod your heads.
But isn't this a joint session?
This is
So-
a
Right.
joint session.
So I mean,
I think the distinction that Chelsea is trying to make is that for the process sake, we only need the recommendations legally from the planning commission. But it's definitely helpful to know that the design review committee is also in support of
concurrence,
these, in concurrence. So that's where Chelsea's saying that we could add to the planning commission resolution, whereas stating that the design review committee has collectively recommended.
The fact is, the
changes.
resolution says that the design committee was been involved in it, that we met with you. It just doesn't say the design committee has supported the amendments. And it seems to me that that's something that's missing if everything else is included.
And honestly, in that it affects the duties and responsibilities of our committee, I love the idea of having it be a joint proclamation that reflects that. I'm not sure, you know, that's counter to what Chelsea just said, but then we could all have a vote together and that would resolve that and take it to the city council.
I think the only potential issue I would see there, and Chelsea can comment more, is that if anybody looks at these records in the future, it may be confusing that the design review committee was required to make this recommendation and this finding, whereas that's not the case. So from a legal perspective, I think we would want to keep it as clean and clear what the requirements are, but it's definitely, I don't see why you couldn't take a vote and document the fact that your committee are supportive of this.
Is that also, Chelsea, you concur on that, or?
Yes, I think the resolution should be a resolution of the planning commission alone, but the DRC should feel free, and I think it's, you know, be very nice to have a motion saying that, you know, motion in support of the changes discussed or something along those lines. And then the planning commission, when they go to adopt the resolution, in addition to directing the changes that have been discussed, directing those changes to be made, they could also direct staff to amend the resolution to reflect the DRC's motion.
Okay,
Well, I so move.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 4 and 1 absent.
Okay. I have one other question on special events and deleting that whole section. How long do you envision that being vacant? You say you're gonna bring it back to the city council with a new recommendation. But basically, in reading what was here and what was said at the last meeting and in your notes, the city has been in violation of this requirement, and so we're deleting the requirement, so the city is no longer in violation. Am I correct on that? 57. It's 1112-8.
Oh, deleting special events.
So
And that resulted when we wanted to add parades.
Right.
thank you for asking that question. I think maybe this was a little unclear by how it was put forward in the attachments, but, and Zena, please jump in if I'm misremembering our conversation, but I think the intent was to leave section 12- section 11-12-8, other than any cleanup for the planning manager terminology as is. And then we're gonna go to the city council for further direction, and that we were trying to flag that this section is gonna be overhauled. And so some of the comments you had previously about making sure that parades were added into the list of special events in that section. The reason why staff wasn't recommending that change was because we want to go to city council for more holistic changes, and we think that special event section will probably not be in Title 11 anymore.
So we're not really
Accurate or?
So we're not really recommending that that be deleted? That's something you're going to recommend? Because it says, you know, on page 57, section deleted in its entirety pending direction from the council. And these are recommendations that we're putting forward to the city council.
And Chelsea, if I can chime in, Monday night at city council, they talked exactly about this. When they were talking about special events and parades and doing a calendar, and they said, wow, we really gotta delve into this. When it came to not the visitors, what do we call them? Not the TAC recommendations, the Tourist Advisory Council. And they said it's a big lump sum that we gotta come up with and deal with. And it kind of dovetails into that. They're aware of it, is my point, right?
They're very aware of it, and right now we are planning on taking that discussion to them on special events on March 14th. So just a couple of meetings forward, and it is just, yeah, I think what we're trying to address here is that an event is not just a temporary land use permit. There's just a lot more to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really more related to marketing and the overall impacts to the city, and so the process needs to be different than just an application going to the planning department. So that's where we will have that conversation with city council on how we could manage all of the events, and what those procedures should be, and Title 11 just doesn't seem like the right place right now.
So Jack, should you say there was?
If I can clarify a little bit too, I think for this purposes, if you all are in agreement that the section 11.12.8 is outdated and not good, you can recommend that it be deleted to city council now, but then city council might actually, like when it goes to adopt changes in an ordinance, though the changes to address section 11.12.8 might be separate from the ordinance that is going to implement the rest of the changes that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we'd like to do that, make the recommendation rather than just deleting it.
Make the recommendation to update it?
To update it and
address it, put it where it's supposed to be, whatever.
possibly move it somewhere else, rather than just saying delete it.
Okay, so I apologize, this is getting into the weeds, but from a process perspective, if we're gonna move it to a different section of the code as in outside Title 11, then the Planning Commission doesn't have a review and recommendation role for changes to the code that are outside the zoning code. But you would need to make recommendations regarding removing it from Title 11. So to help streamline the process, if the Planning Commission is comfortable with recommending that the City Council delete and remove it from Title 11, and that they defer to the City Council on how to address elsewhere in the code, that would allow this process to cover your review and recommendation piece for section 11, section 11.12-8, and then the city council can, proceed and move forward with how to address it elsewhere in the code without having another,
Review.
round of planning commission review for just that little section to delete it from Title 11. Am I making sense?
Yes, if you can word that the way you
Just how you
said it,
said
I think we'll be fine with it.
Okay, great.
Okay, any other comments?
And again, just for clarification, we are not talking about, was it just included maybe for our reference, the whole chapter 4?
Yeah.
Correct? We're not talking about chapter 4.
That's actually part of
Are
the
you-
agenda
Is it?
for
I was
our
kept going
committee.
through your agenda.
It's the second half of this meeting.
It is there.
It's
Yeah.
part of
It's
it.
the agenda
I
items.
keep
Yeah.
looking for it and I'm going, okay, it's there.
Yeah.
All
You
right.
can stay and make
Yeah.
comments.
I'm going to
That's
make
the-
comments. I was gonna make them now, but, because you'll put a 3-minute timer on me. see? Right now, I can just keep talking.
Okay, so can we get a motion to approve, well, resolution, I don't know if the number is 22 quadruple X, with the changes as discussed tonight, and noting in the resolution that we have voted concurrence from the DRC.
I so moved.
It's been moved.
I second that.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes 5-0.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you all for all of your comments. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, everybody. At this point, Chair of the Planning Commission, Williams, if you would adjourn this joint meeting.
Okay. The joint meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
6:06 p.m.
literally, just got letters in the last week from them saying.
Public feel like-
Fair warning, it's a coming. So we're all now moving this. Okay, we gotta do. See y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna call to order the meeting of the Design Review Committee for February 2021. 22, I said.
I'm still.
Yeah, really. You have a roll call, please.
Member Dryden Hess. Here. Member Deputy.
Yep.
Member Cully. Absent. Member Jacobson Bates.
President?
Chair Kavanaugh.
Present. I think we already had our Pledge of Allegiance, unless you want to do it again. I think we had our Pledge of Allegiance, so I'm going to...
Definitely, we usually do it every time, but it's up to you.
And you have the agenda. It's sort of the second half of the agenda as part of the materials. And by the way, I appreciate all the efforts that you, Xenia, and you, Anna Marie, and Sophia, I guess you had a hard hand in this too, but preparing all the materials for this kind of complex meeting, an important meeting, was well done. I appreciate that. Any questions about the agenda as presented to us?
Just that I noted I didn't see any minutes. Am I correct? Did I miss something there?
The minutes of January 20th,
They're on page 61.
yeah, they are here.
Sorry, I told you I didn't prepare as well as I.
That's okay.
Oh, okay, thank you. No comments on the agenda otherwise.
Yeah, no comments. My only comment is I appreciate particularly with the detail you provided in the discussion of the tourist-related commercial signage. I mean, you talked about some of the things that we were dealing with on the visitor center and so forth, so that it helps provide that log of specific comments. Not that we just discussed, but that we had specific areas of concern, and those are noted in the agenda, so I appreciate that. With that, I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of January 20th.
I move we approve the minutes.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
Second, so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, are there,
Oh, 4-0?
what's that?
Just recording the votes whenever
Okay,
you vote.
yeah, that's right, 4-0. Are there any public comments to come before the DRC now for matters that are not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none in the room or on Zoom, we'll proceed. The next item that I have is the planning status updates on a couple items. It's 6A and 6B, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so first thing to review is to discuss and approve the tourist-related commercial signage and branding in the visitor center interior design. Again, there were two sets of numbers or whatever, but I think we have, the numbers are what are they? I guess they're in here.
63.
63, yeah.
Yes. What did we have?
Yeah, it was a little confusing, just because I got my bundle on Monday, and then this was added, and so I had to stick it in, and the numbers changed and so forth. But anyway, so with that, I think we have a presenter to.
Yep, so if I could just
Sure.
remind you of where we are in this process, is why we're here today again. As you would recall, at your last DRC meeting, you had a presentation by Cogs and Marvel, who are our marketing contractor under their scope of work currently. They were working with the city on developing a brand, and they will also be, the brand will be, or as presented, will be applied to various aspects of city marketing type of materials. That includes the website, Solving USA, that Cox and Marvel will be updating with this color palette and the new designs. And we also have in front of you the recommended designs for signage, which could be applied to a future project to add additional signage and wayfinding across the city. And then finally, we have in front of you also under their scope of work, the design and actually making it happen in terms of the interior for the visitor center. So it's here in front of you because you are the holders of the interpreting the design guidelines, and we definitely want to make sure that whatever we present going forward as we apply these branding guidelines to the projects, that they are consistent with what you see with the style for the city of Solvang. So with that, we have staff with Cox and Marvel here with us. Scott?
Members of the committee, thank you. Madam City Manager and Madam City Clerk, thank you for having us today. I just want to add one more quick reminder. Thank you, Zena, for the highlight of where we're at. I think the one other piece that I would like to mention is that there was a lot of discussion around some of the structure of the logo itself that was provided to us and approved currently by the City Council. And in conversations with Madam City Manager, we discussed that any changes to the logo as presented would be held over as a separate scope of work, either for us or another provider in the future. So the presentation you'll see from my creative director, Sheila, supported by our account director, Madura, here on the line with me tonight, will go into the items that were discussed in the last meeting that were within the scope, which were, as the city manager mentioned, the design guidelines for the tourism sites, as well as a refresh to the visitor center. So with that, I will turn it over to our creative director, Sheila, who can walk you through her team's work over the last couple of weeks.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Scott.
I'm sorry.
Ryan?
Oh, quick question, just to clarify. So, as we're looking through this, we're seeing the logo or the brand mark. We're not commenting on that today, or because that's going to.
So what they were clarifying is that the way that the scope of the contract is right now, if they were to make any work in terms of cleaning up this logo, which was some of the recommendations last time, where you said maybe some of the lines could be just a little bolder, to make it come through better.
Right.
That would have to be a separate scope of work.
Okay.
I think you can definitely continue to make those comments for my benefit, because if that's a desire to take on that additional work, then it would be helpful to know that. It's just not going to be something that Cox and Marvel can complete as of today, and we're hoping that the discussion today will be the last step in providing us with the branding that we can then take forward and apply to different projects.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to walk us through in the same order as we did last time. So we'll jump in here. I know you have a copy in front of you. We're going to walk through the brand elements. Then we're going to go into color. And then we'll get to the visitor center and signage. So looking at the logo, nothing has changed from the last time you viewed this. So we've got the version with the tagline left up, reversed out in white, and without a tagline on the right there. We'll get to the color palette, so I'm going to skip over this page. The patterns, the feedback from last time was just to tone them down a little bit, so we made them a little bit more tone on tone here, so they're a little bit less graphic. And again, we never see these on their own as we're looking at them on this page. They are always overlaid with type or some other graphic element. So I think maybe if you can hold your comments until you see it in context of an actual layout, that would be helpful. Typography has not changed, although you did comment to all type in Utopia should never be in all caps. So we've made that change across the board in our deliverables, which we'll get to in a moment. So looking at everything in context, now we see the headline there that is in a title case. The tagline is decoupled from the logo because it's just too small to see in the context of this logo on the website. So we added it as a subhead to the headline, "Welcome to the Danish capital of America." And then there was an older logo that was at the bottom footer that has been since removed. And would you like me to walk through all the way, or would you like to give comments as I go?
I think our people will interrupt you if they have something to say.
Sure, okay, sounds good. All right, so moving on to city wayfinding, a few comments. I think we had city of Solvang, so we removed the city of. Now Solvang is nice and big. We just wanted to show the other color combinations that could potentially be part of this system. And then in the other comment, actually there were two more comments. The texture on the yellow background was too heavy, so that's been screened back. And then the logo was quite small. And the logo that we had previously, it had the lockup with the word Solvang, which is a bit repetitive since the sign says Solvang quite big. So we removed that and we used the other version of the logo that was given to us that you see here that's locked up in the circle, and we made it nice and big on this backdrop. And we added a slight little drop shadow to behind it just to give it a little bit of a standout there. When you see it on the red, it pops a little bit more. The idea here is to have sort of like colors that are moving from, yellow, blue, red, yellow, blue, red, and so forth and so on as they are on the street. And then the back artwork has not changed. That was approved from last time with the black and white photography and the half timbers across over top.
The one thing, on the yellow background, the white, reverse white logo is really hard to read. And I think if you're,
Can we go back to that slide?
traveling down, yeah, it's on there. You just kind of squint, the white windmill part of the logo, it just doesn't read too well on the yellow, where you see it does on the red. It just kind of goes away.
Kind of disappears in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the issue there with the yellow is that, so the logo in its sort of two-color form is blue and red. It just kind of clashes a little bit sitting on top of the yellow, and that's not really what the yellow was for, to sort of have all those colors together. So my suggestion would be to remove the yellow background from this system and not use it on the flags, or to remove the logo from these. You know you're in Solvang. I mean, the logo being on every single thing is probably a little overkill. Like you see the welcome banner there on the blue, written in Danish. That one doesn't have a logo on it. So this idea of sort of like, going back and forth between colors, perhaps the yellow is now served as a big keyword over top, and then the logo, can live on the blue and the red backgrounds, so that you have that contrast.
I think that makes sense. I mean, if that's your recommendation, I would agree with that, which is keep yellow for large print and then use the blue and the red where it pops.
I think too, what I'm seeing is, it goes back to what's not being addressed, which is the logo itself. So if a cleaned up logo were incorporated, it might have a different impact. So that brings me to, which I hadn't planned on saying here, that I think it's really important that the logo be added to the scope of work, because you're doing all this work, and for sure the logo is gonna be used on a lot of them. I do have a question, and maybe this is just me not understanding. As we look at the slide that incorporates a, one of the, the clock tower, I guess it is, on one of the buildings in town, putting a physical location that's either right there or right around the corner on the banner, tell me about that. Because it seems like it's right there in our visual corridor or something very similar, so it almost seems like it's adding a little bit of visual clutter as opposed to showing off something special or being welcoming.
Right, I mean, the idea was just to highlight architecture and show it in a more sort of like interesting way, turning to black and white with the half-timber graphic language over top. We could be very sort of intentional about where these live so that we make sure that there isn't one that's directly across from, you know, another building. We can have a little library of these. Maybe these only live on the main road there, and then maybe some of the buildings that are like the museum could be on one of them that is not on that main road. So there's things that we can do to make sure that, to your point, it is not kind of a repetitive, strange thing that, you know, we're showing.
I like the fact that it's incorporating some architectural details, and I was thinking that maybe it's something where rather than being a whole identifiable part of it, it's just one element of a building, because there's so many details on so many of the buildings. Just a thought, because I do think it looks good. I like it with the, you know, the way it's incorporated. I'm just not sure, you know, where it
Rather
would
than the whole
work.
building, just something.
Yeah, and what that would be and how it works, again, I can't define that for you. I know how it works for the museum because we have an identifiable logo that we can use, but that's different, and it's, you know, anyway, it's different. So just questions, and then remind me, the patterns and the backgrounds, I know they originate from something specific. Please remind me of what those are.
Yeah, these are coming from the ask to have a little bit more of a traditional feel. And so these, which we're calling woodcut textures, are just kind of coming in to give a little bit of depth and interest. Otherwise, you've got a solid color background with typography and logo over top. That's not very interesting. So as we developed the system, we wanted to bring in a little bit of visual interest with a little bit of meaning behind it. So, you know, this idea of the wood, like just bringing a materiality into the system, but in a graphic way. So that's where those three textures.
I like it, I just couldn't remember the origins,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, well, my comment is, it's good, at the risk of really sounding boring, you know, and I like the color palette that you've selected. I like the yellow as a snappy, eye-catching color. On a flag like that, I'm really drawn especially to the red, with the white on red, I guess, in part because those are the colors of the Danish flag, and it says Denmark. You know, I suppose there's reason for variety as well, but I like using, you know, in a prominent way, those two colors as a closer tie, I guess, to the Danish connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a nice way to kind of highlight that comment in a system that you assign a primary, secondary, and tertiary sort of system where it's like the red and the white is the primary sort of banner. So you'll see that a lot more. And then the secondary would be the blue, and you'll see that kind of a little bit less. And then the yellow is tertiary, so you'll see that much less. So that you really have that sort of hierarchy in color values that you're being drawn to, which obviously being colors of the Danish flag is important. So yeah, we could do that for sure. I just wanted to go back to the comment about the black and white photography. I think that's a really nice suggestion to kind of a little bit and go into some of the details and architecture. So I think we can kind of create a nice, you know, if we do develop this out further, kind of create a library of photography that we are zooming in a little bit and kind of creating a little bit more interest as opposed to showing like a full building as you see here. So I do like that suggestion a lot.
And the black and white really lends itself well in that application.
Agreed. Yep. Okay. Let's make a note here.
Yeah, and there are lots of little architectural quirks that you can, you know, highlight that way. Even, you know, variety of doors and so forth. Okay.
And things like wind vanes on the roofs. Oh my goodness, there's so many different wind vanes around town and little intricate woodworking and such too.
Or the storks.
Yeah, there's storks all over, and although that seems almost like odd for a banner somehow, I'm not sure.
I just love seeing when they do spot with it.
Yeah.
You know, now that we have
Yes.
sort of the design approved, I think the next step would be to have a photographer go out with that intention, right? As opposed to going through a library of photography and zooming in, right? This is signage, we use it a bit large, we wanna make sure everything is nice and crisp. It would be to have a photographer go out and go for those details in particular, right? So they're really kind of honing in on all those details, create a little library, create a system here, and then that becomes, you know, a campaign that can go up for a season, you know, on these flagpoles.
Absolutely, and if there's a photographer coming, I'm happy to assist or get somebody else who's real familiar with a lot of those little kind of hidden little gems, and some that are very, very visible but are overlooked because there's so much that happens in the visual of our downtown area.
Oh, I love that. That's great to know. Thank you. Okay, great. Let's move on to the museum pass. Again, this is not a real deliverable. This is just our way of trying to show how the system works as a whole. So you've got the color palette in full sort of, you know, you see the red and blue primary, and then you see that yellow as more of a tertiary or a secondary element. You've got the textures that are in there. They're much more screened back than what we saw last time. And then all the typography has been corrected to no longer be all caps in these applications. So whether this becomes something real or not, at least we can kind of get a sense for what that system looks like with all those pieces in action. And then moving on to social media, nothing really changed here. We just fixed the texture on the middle example, just screening it back a little bit more. So I think there's a lot more that can be developed here with motion and animation and things like that that can bring a lot of interest to the system as a whole with these half timbers, working with the textures and the color palette and all the things. So I think this is something that can be developed out. Okay, well, moving on to the color palette. Last time we met, there were three options. We all decided the third option was a lot too bright, so we removed it. The ask was to find, in option 1, a color in blue that was a little bit brighter. And then the second ask was to find a color in blue that was between option 1 and option 2. So on the left there, I've just highlighted those two things. So lighten up the old option 1 a touch, and that we've pulled out some PMS colors. I know that you had asked for swatches, so the next step here, if you think these are working, is we will order those and send them directly to you from Pantone, and that way you'll be able to look at the Pantone chips in person. So 2 colors have been identified. There's a little grid here that I created on the right that shows you the old option 1 on the bottom and the old option 2 on the right. And then we've got the new option 1 that is directly related to the color below it. So it's a little bit brighter, it's not as dark. And then for option 2, this is the old one, and this is sort of the color that can be found in between this blue and this blue here. Again, just as a reminder, and I'm sure you all know this because this is, you know, what you do, we're all looking at this on screen. So the colors that we're all looking at different blues right now. So what you have printed in front of you is even probably a different blue. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I brought my swatch book. Just so we have something to look at, I can pass this.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Around. Can we bring that, so you've got 2758.
2758.
Was the original option, is that what you're saying? Or
No, these are the new ones. So 2758 is the brighter version of the old blue on option 1. Actually, let's just forget about the last round. Let's just look at these 2 colors together. I think that might be easier. So we've got 2758 and then we've got 2748. Those are the 2 blues that are now.
Well, it's hard to read, but they are very dark in reality.
Right, yes, they're
black.
And remember, we're looking at these under fluorescent lights with no unnatural daylight, so they look dark and a little purpley.
Yeah, I mean, these really need to be looked at in natural light. You know,
Yes.
a lot of this stuff is going to be seen outside. It's going to be with, you know, in natural light. So that's how these should be viewed. So I can walk you through them, and this is absolutely something you can also let Xenia know, and she can get back to us and let us know which color was selected. But I did just a side-by-side here so we can see the full system of, you know, the red. And I also identified PMS values for the red, the yellow, and the gray. So just so you have all those colors, you can look at them all together. And then I also did just an example of, you know, dropping them into the different deliverables. And again, on screen it's hard to see, but if I go back and forth, you can kind of see, you know, option 2 does have a brightness to it. I feel like this one does connect maybe a little bit more to the examples of, you know, the dishes and just that sort of like very Danish artwork that was kind of referenced in the beginning. And then the first one, the 2758, it's just a little bit more like bold and royal and just kind of has that strength to it.
Yeah, I like 2748. I like it. I think it's a little brighter and a little less deep.
I think it's really hard to make a decision based upon the lights in here.
It is,
Even,
but I mean,
yeah.
I do color enough that I
Do you,
can tell.
can you
Yeah.
tell?
Yeah, I can tell. But I just think I'm gonna like 4/8 better, but I think it's only because 5/8's too, might be just too dark.
That was, our concern was
Yeah.
they're very dark.
Right.
They're-
Although they're very close
They are
to
close.
each other.
They are.
So
But I do think it's fair to look at them outside when it's daylight,
Yeah.
for sure.
I think what we're kind of all saying though, if I understand, is 5/8 is too dark.
For sure.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I
So-
think it is.
Look how close this is.
I don't think I'm of the opinion that 4/8 is good and if you want an answer from me, I would say we'll go with 4/8. Like, you could pick blue like that
Forever.
you know, forever, yeah,
True.
so.
And
How
again, we're
how
in
much
the
better
wrong
is it
light.
gonna be, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's good, it's not bad,
Right.
it's good.
And it has to be put into the context of not just the blue standalone, but the blue with the red,
That's
with
right.
the yellow, with the gray.
That's
So,
right. And it has a little more pop now. Remember, the old one was flat,
Right.
so.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a vibrancy to it, which is nice, but it still has that when the original logo was given to us, it had that blue assigned to it that I think, you know, we liked because it had this really beautiful sort of like traditional feel to it.
Yeah.
But I think this 2748 still carries that. And as you said, there are so many, we can go on like this for weeks and months. So I thought that 2748 was, I thought that was just like the right color.
Was that
for it.
your
Because I
was that your
looking at
preference?
deliverables.
It was. Was 2748 your preference? It was?
It was.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
All right, great. So we will hold there on that final color from you, but good to hear that this is sort of leading the way. Moving on to city signage. Last time we saw these, you know, we went very kind of modern with these, which we totally understand. That's not the vibe in Solvang. But I think, you know, a couple of you understood the reasoning for wanting to at least make this feel a little bit different than the standard kind of signage that is woodcut and throughout. So we made an effort to at least try to look at the shape of things and the materiality and try to give the feel of these a little bit more of a traditional feel and less a museum feel. So what you're seeing here is that we have, I believe, 3 options in here. So obviously we're adjusting the overall shape by just pulling up one point of this. It's no longer sort of like very squared off, and it still feels like a nice monument that will feel different from all the other signage, right? We don't want to just have another sign that looks exactly like everything else. We want this one to be a little bit more special. We still like the idea of the logo sitting high. For if you want to take your photo in front of it, in this example, it shows logo on one side and wayfinding on the back side. with the Danish capital of America wrapping around it. Now, we know that metal is not a material that we necessarily feel is right for solving. I think once we know a design that works, the next step would be working with a vendor, a signage vendor, to see, we want to make sure a material that we select is going to last. It's going to live in the sunlight and different weather temperatures and all the cold and rain and all the things. Anything that's standing outside needs to withstand that. That's often why metal is chosen, because it does withstand a lot of that. I think with the wood texture, we can go with a faux wood for something with a little bit more longevity. Or we can go with a real wood that has more of a textural feel, but that will age differently, as you probably know the differences between those materials. We still want to make sure that we have things that are backlit so that at nighttime we do have that visibility. But again, we know that lighting is a sensitive thing, and we don't want it to be like this, spotlight, that is too bright. I'll just go through, there's just 3 options here. The next option, I liked the idea of bringing in the half timbers, and I believe one of you even suggested that last time we met. And I thought that was an interesting thing. One of you liked this benched idea. So I thought, why don't we take this and create a little bit more of an interesting shape out of it. Again, it's no longer so very square. So giving it a little bit of a peak, and whether we add some detail to this peak, we can certainly look at that as well, as some woodcuts can go into this. But bringing in the half timber pattern as an embossed element on the face of this gives it a little bit of depth, a little bit of interest. It makes it feel a little bit less modern this way. And then the logo is nice and big. It's the circular logo, which seems to fit better within this overall shape on a sign. I mean, the other one can work as well. Honestly, the other logo is problematic for the same reasons that you all called out last time, with that really thin hairline stroke around it, around the word solving. So as I was working through this just felt like a nicer sort of example to drop into place. Of course, once we have the opportunity to jump in, and I'm very eager to clean this logo up for you, I think that maybe the other logo can also be something that can work well here. So that's backlit. And this time we're bringing in red as a highlight, and it's wrapping around the shape. And same comment about materiality. Once we get there, we can kind of see what is that material. We know we're not crazy about metal. What else could it be? So we can kind of get deeper into that. And then the tagline sits on the side as a little detail. So I thought this was a really sort of darling monument signage. It incorporates wayfinding on the back. It has a really strong point of view that you can kind of see, and you can almost imagine it in a couple of places. And then the last example kind of takes the two, option 1 and option 2, and kind of merges them in a way. And it's taking, this idea of a peak, and then running into another element on the back side of it that has the half timbers in a more graphic pattern. I know this one might feel still too modern, but again, we're just trying to create something that stands out and is a little bit more unique than all the other signage. And again, we can kind of look at adding a little bit more detail to some of these. So if there's a form that you think is working, we can certainly go in and add a little bit more detail work to kind of bring that element of sort of craftsmanship or traditional vibe to the signage.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like the half timber suggestion and so forth. Why did you choose Utopia over the Proxima Nova?
I think because it's a serif. We don't want to be modern. We know this. When we first started, we thought, oh, let's just give it a little bit of a modern vibe, and we heard the feedback. We don't want to be modern. Okay. So Proxima Nova is really meant for a body copy. There's lots of copy, you want it to be easily read. That is a sans serif. But for the Danish capital of America, let's use a font that feels a little bit more traditional, and that's what those serifs are doing for us here.
Okay.
I like the idea of half timbers, but it seems as though the one design with the one that's up now is very busy, and I keep thinking about downtown Solving and all the visual that goes on. And half timbers aren't really like that, but, so for that reason, it seems there might be better alternatives. I had a question for you. The blue one has the Danish capital of America running from, starting at the bottom and going up, which seemed backwards to me. The red one has that going the other way. Starts at the top and goes down, kind of like a spine of a book. I
Yeah.
was just wondering if there was a special reason one versus the other from a design element, because I don't know.
I mean, I think you can ask different designers what they think. I'm in thinking that I like when type points up to the sky rather than down to the ground. But with signage and anything environmental, it does benefit to have it point down to the ground as you see here, because it's easier to read because it's higher up as opposed to it being the other way around. So in this case, if someone's standing in front of it, you're missing part of it. So it can be done both ways, really. I don't think there's a standard. I think in environmental design, you will often see this more often. I just did it both ways just to kind of see if something struck a chord.
It was interesting. Again, because of the busy views up and down streets of Solvang, the images on the screen seem like they have the strongest potential. I have a question, and this goes back to the branding. It's the Danish capital of America. Do we need to have the in there? Could it just be Danish capital of America?
I mean, that's a good point. I'm not trying not to make you dizzy here as I go back. When the logo was given to us, the tagline was even smaller than what you're seeing here. We asked for permission to touch the tagline and at least have it go all the way across. If the was gone, it would give the tagline even a little bit more presence. It would make it a little bit bigger. So I think it's almost a subjective thing. I could see functionality in removing it, so that tagline.
I'd like to lose
The less words, the better.
Yeah,
You don't need the.
and it allows you to make the words that remain bigger, and it's already implied. So that was my question, was if that was, dictated in it. My suggestion would be delete.
Freed up 4 spaces.
Well, plus
absolutely.
it makes Danish the very first word of it, and.
My thought as well.
opposed to the
And
second.
if you're, when you're saying standing in front of it and covering part of it, if the Danish is at the top, you're not gonna necessarily be covering that.
That's right.
And again, going back to the logo, I think it is paramount that the logo be cleaned up so that we can all tell what all these applications will look like with the logo cleaned up, because I think it'll be much more legible when you're done with it.
Totally in alignment with you on that. We are aching to clean this up for you.
That said, I also really like the bench concept, seems really fun. Don't know where that would go, but I think that it seems as though there could be a way of utilizing that within any of these designs. Red seems like a good color for it. Blue sometimes seems to be, I know it's supposed to be very easily viewed, but it doesn't pop the same way. The red color maybe deserves a little more conversation as to what shade of red it is. But I suggest the red for the signs overall, and they don't seem to be in alignment with accessibility signs that are often blue.
The question I have in terms of these monument signs as also being wayfinding, is that in wayfinding you've got people approaching signs from 2 different directions, and so if the purpose of a sign is for wayfinding, then you'd want those messages to be on both sides instead of one. So I'm just thinking through the kind of use of this sign, where it would be, and, you know, I mean, I guess that's a further exploration as you get into the project, but, you know, the monument sign almost, you know, wants to be a monument sign, and then wayfinding is sort of a secondary kind of element in the system.
Yes, no, agreed. I think last time we saw this, we showed you 3 types of designs. We showed you the sort of like monument of a logo sign that would be at when you're entering the city.
Mhm.
And then we had a wayfinder. And then we had, I think the other one was one that you would take a photo in front of. So we have 3 types of signs. I mean, this is just an attempt to show, but you're absolutely right. If there's wayfinding on one side, it should be on the other side, right? Because you wouldn't be able to see it from the reverse. So as we sort of like choose a direction, then we kind of flesh out the whole system. Like if this whole bench thing is something you really love, maybe there's different versions of this. One that's really long, one that's kind of short, like this one, very sort of like one person can sit on it. So there's lots of different ways we can kind of dive into this and really kind of create a system that works. The comment to the half timbers, this is not really how they look. Totally aware of that. In fact, as we were looking at architecture, it's like they're not perfect squares going all the way across. Sometimes you see them in different formations. This is just the system that we had in our brand system that I sort of dropped in. But these can be done in so many different ways to kind of connect back to the idea of a half timber. So again, those are things that we would just dive in deeper, knowing that overall, like this shape feels right, these colors feel right. Then we can kind of dive in and be like, okay, this little peak idea is working. Let's create a full system on it. So I'm with you on that.
I think it's really gonna be location dependent as to the function and how they work.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just actually was gonna say that I feel like the scale of the 2 signs are so different that's what I'm challenged. It's not that I dislike one or like one more than the other. I feel like they have different applications because the one that Esther, you're kind of referring to, option 3, is quite large. And if you make it smaller, it doesn't have the impact, or it won't be as, it just won't feel, like the scale won't be right. So whereas the other one is more narrow and might have a better application in a different location, and you could change the scale of the half timber design to match more of what was done on option 3. It doesn't have to be double wide. It could be a single, and therefore you might have that family actually of optionality because you have the same idea pitch. So it's almost like you've created a subfamily with the 2 options, in my view. Like with minor tweaks, you would have, actually it is a family in a way, right? So I guess I'm supportive of however you design, because it's like minor tweaks and it's already a family. It's already a system in a family. They're not so different that they wouldn't even work together. They would.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And in fact, when I did these 2 options, I thought, well, they do kind of look like they're the same family.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it just shows that there is flexibility within the shape and the sort of different, as you said, depends on where this thing is going, right? The one that's in front of the visitor center is quite short, right? The one that's just right there, and we're going to see a photo of it in the coming pages here. So I think if overall we are understanding that maybe this idea of the half timbers, whether it's adjusted, but the overall shape that we have here is leaning more towards and away from where we were like in a museum. Now this might be feeling a little bit more like solving, and I think that's kind of what we're after, and hoping if that's the case, then we flesh it out.
And completely understand that you're not gonna spend lots of time getting a super detailed plan that will be rejected, for another one.
Yeah, I mean, these are set sketches in a sense, you know what I mean, until we get deep.
Yeah, I like what Jennifer was saying about, creating a family of signs. You're right, it looks like it almost is now. What I really love is the combination of materials. I think the wood with, you know, with that modern sense of whatever that happens to be, whether it's metal or porcelain, enamel, whatever. It feels good, it feels right. So that, from that directional point of view, it's pretty cool.
And I think, as I look at this, what sets it apart from everything else in town is some of those more modern, cleaner angles, and it needs to stand apart from everything else. And as far as
see it.
right, so that there, and that there's a consistency, so you're looking at, so okay, here's the signs, and depending upon the location, my thought is that it could do dual purpose and be a photo op on the front and be a wayfinding on the back too. You know, people know that these signs contain information and they're consistent in their look and are around town. I think it's possible it could do both, but it's all driven by the location.
Yeah, I think once we identify where these are going, then we can really kind of give them purpose and make them, you know, form and function hand in hand.
And scale them to the site and the function.
Exactly right, yes.
Yeah, and if I may, Committee Member Jacobson Bates, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, for the current deliverable here is really creating a system that will absolutely, once it comes time for the city manager, you know, to work with the council or to work with, you know, the overall plan, to then actually start executing the signage, then of course, you know, the actual signs with location and specific materials will come back to this committee for approval. So I think, you know, our goal in this current deliverable is to get a system that this committee feels comfortable enough with, that it can be handed to any designer as part of an RFP process to come back with, you know, with recommendations for signage, be it us, which, you know, as Sheila mentioned, I know that she's quite keen to, her and her team are quite keen to work on them, but regardless, you know, through an RFP process, we have enough of a system in place that we can hand this out and get something that comes back within this family that makes sense. So, you know, we're not necessarily saying we approve this exact sign and this exact design to go, you know, all over the place. It's really what another committee member said just a few moments ago about ensuring that this committee is comfortable with the family, so that we can incorporate that into the final deliverable, which is that overarching sort of guideline for how we should talk about solving externally, both on digital, which you know, saw just a minute ago, on the website, on social, and then of course with materiality on our own materials when we build them in the future on site.
Okay, let's continue, and we got, time is not on our side, so.
Yes, okay, agreed.
Let's move on and quickly go through the Tourist Visitor Center.
Okay, great. So last time we saw this, we saw a color that we were drawn to, a robin's egg, sort of a blue. But the comment that was given, which I thought was really great, was the 3-color is a very sort of elevated look. And so we wanted to incorporate a 3rd color into the design. So you see that robin's egg blue there that we can give you a paint chip for if this is something that you think is working. The signage out front is from the previous rounds. You'll just have to ignore it for now. And then I went in and I brought that red, which I think is just such a strong color. You know, it's in the flag. We know that it's, you know, it's a color that is making this quite unique in this color combination of the blue, the light blue, the brown, and the red together. And so thinking about it a little bit differently than the way it was before, I'll just go back. The windows were highlighted, and you know, I think if we and the gutters that are coming down were not highlighted. And I think something really interesting happens when you kind of take away the color from the windows and you just give it as an element that's kind of creating a border onto the architecture elements, the roof line, and then coming down even on the spout there. So, and then on the interior, the beams up top were a little bit too dark last time, so I just lightened that up. And then there was the comment that we could remove the painting of, the royal family up top there and replace it with some art. So I removed it, and I think it's a nice partnership to take with the museum to see if there's something that they might have, or this is just something that I did a search for, and I thought that it was a beautiful sort of little moody image that had the flags in the foreground, which I thought was quite pretty. And repeating that red, which I think is really important as well. And there's lots more that we can do in here. And again, these are very sort of like high-level sketches of what the interior could look like. But again, just reiterating, removing a lot of that wood rot that's happening, cleaning up a lot of the interior, and then just leveraging some materiality that gives a little bit of a cleaner, brighter, lighter vibe. And then replacing those stools that we had last time with a bench that could give, again, just, it's not a place to hang out necessarily, but if there's somebody older or someone with kids and they're asking a question and they're lingering about, at least they can just take a load off, have a seat, and then they're out of your way. And then the layout has remained the same, just dropped in the bench there underneath where those monitors would be sitting that are cycling through imagery. So I'll go back to the exterior here for your feedback.
I think it's great.
Ditto. Like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't need to make anything else,
Yeah.
any other changes.
Yeah, I think it looks good.
Yeah.
I like the
The
downspout.
Yeah.
Yeah, who would have thought?
The
Yeah.
red detailing around the timbers and then simplifying it around the windows, and it looks great.
Interior looks more sophisticated to me and also a lot warmer in the welcoming aspect of it. Bench is great. And you think about when you go into a visitor center, if they've been, doing what they're supposed to do in Solvang and been shopping, that's a perfect place to set down your bags while you're talking to somebody too, not just your body. So it serves multiple functions.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Do we need actually any vote, or is it just?
Well, I was just looking at how it's noticed, and it is noticed where you can approve it. So if you are absolutely good with the exterior design without getting any chips or anything in the future, you could approve it as a motion, and we won't have to circle back when any of this project goes forward.
If I might just jump in, I think it would be a really good thing just to have a couple of brush outs on the exterior with a couple of different Robin blue. I mean, it's really important to look at it in the light that's there. I mean, obviously seasons change and lights, the light will change. But I think that any interior designer will tell you, you've got to get that color onto the face of it. Look at it with the material, do a couple of brush outs, maybe 3 colors, and then get some approval there. Unfortunately, that's something that we will need a physical body there to kind of take a look at and give us the okay there. But that's how I would feel comfortable approaching this, as opposed to like painting the whole thing and then it not being the right color.
So perhaps we can do what we've done before and have a subcommittee, a committee approval, but a subcommittee to give the final, conceptual approval.
Yeah, I agree. We could have a volunteers from the committee physically inspect the brush out.
Yeah.
When that happens, but I think right now this design looks. This looks great. I've got one volunteer.
Yeah.
I've got another volunteer.
I think.
I'd love to tag along too.
Yeah.
Oh, it could only be 2 of you.
Oh, because the
Okay.
Brown Act. Well, I'm.
Jennifer said it.
Whatever. Yeah, and I'm fine if you want to go with
Yeah,
Jennifer. so-
Brian can do it with Jennifer.
Yeah,
That'd be
okay.
great.
I'm
That's
fine with
great.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Brian,
And-
Deputy, and Jennifer, yes?
And it would be great to see the chips as well before that. If
Correct.
we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Yes, agreed. And I'll identify what those are, and then I can pass those along to Medora to share with you, or Scott, and they'll share it with you.
Okay.
Great.
Then we'll bring the subcommittee's recommendation back for ratification of this entire committee at whenever it's ready.
Okay, so today we're giving conceptual approval, and then you two will make the final determination that you come back and recommend to us, and then we approve as a committee. Am I understanding that?
Correct, yes.
I just want to make sure we're not
Are we,
bogged down.
I don't think that we're necessarily bugging it down because there's actually not a budget set for the painting of the outside yet, so
Okay.
we have enough time.
Okay,
okay,
We have budget set for the interior,
Okay.
so if that's is all good by you, then they will move forward with
but
it.
it- so
Okay,
there's
so-
is there a motion though to
well, so,
approve?
Approve the interior.
yeah, I approve, well, should we start with the exterior or should we start with the interior? Because they're kind of two separate things, aren't they?
You could only take a motion on the interior because that's the one
Okay.
that's ready to go.
Okay, so we don't need to do anything with the exterior today? Okay.
Motion to approve the interior as presented.
Second?
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Passes 4-0.
Okay, thank you all, and thank you for your good work on,
Sheila, congrats.
Sheila,
Yes,
thank you.
Nice work. Appreciate it how you incorporated all of our comments and looking forward to seeing it develop.
Yeah.
Of course, it's been fun working with you all. I really appreciate all the feedback. It's been great. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything more on that issue, that matter?
No.
Okay, so the next item in planning is status update, and I'm not sure, maybe you'll have to describe exactly. I know you said discuss sign regulations. We had talked about design standard enforcement, particularly in the TRC. I think you submitted, I guess, along with Lori and Sophia, a memo to discuss sign regulation and design guideline enforcement. I thought the memo was great, and I think the outline of the various steps that you could take, the outreach, the sign, those were all excellent. The various components of outreach, the sign inventory is a good idea, but it does require funding that has to be approved from the city council.
Okay.
Now, where it says fiscal impact on those next page, or the third page, that's only with regard to basically the approval of code amendments that you're talking about. You're not talking about the hiring a person to do the sign inventory.
35,000.
35,000 is a rough
Yeah.
estimate of hiring somebody to do the inventory.
Right.
Plus, there would be some attorney time.
Do you want to provide us an outline, a brief outline of the memo? Is that
Sure. Yes.
Or
I can provide a brief outline of the memo, and Sophia has been very helpful in writing this report, so we're
Yeah.
happy to have a full-time assistant planner at
That's
this
well done.
point. We also have Eddie here, who is our retired chief of police and code enforcement officer.
Good. Good to meet you.
He's
Very
able
patient
to
man.
answer any questions. I know there's been just some
Okay.
interest in knowing what he sees there being in town enforcing these actions. So, the conversation has been kind of coming up here and there, how do we really incentivize and help people be in compliance versus, those who comply are the ones that pay and we know about versus there's some others who are basically kind of working outside of the system. So with that, we came up with a few options that we think will be helpful for people to comply. A is the outreach, so start with the point of we make sure that we inform, so that at least those who otherwise would have just not known and been outside of the compliance system will hopefully be brought into the system, those who are willing and to work with us. So with that, we are recommending that we will do outreach and work with different organizations and property owners that actually, have a touch and closer communication with those businesses to ensure that everyone in town is knowledgeable of the requirements and will advise any new business that's coming in. So we'll do some outreach to property managers. We are suggesting we'll reach out to property management companies. We'll also work with the Solvang of Commerce, Chamber of Commerce to make sure that when businesses come to them, they have some materials that they can hand out, and then realtors and any sign makers. We also want to involve we have a touch point when we issue a business license. That's another touch point when we can issue helpful resources and guidelines as to what the business needs to do. Additionally, we have the quarterly newsletter that's going out every quarter to every utility customer in Solvang. So that's a publication that's both printed and is available online. We also mail it to any available mailing addresses, including our business licenses. So we would like to have some repeated acknowledgement of some of the basic of what to do and basically directing folks in the right direction. And then we would also, we are continuing to work on providing instructions online that are more, self-help oriented. Historically, in Solvang, sort of the guidelines weren't very flashed out in terms of what's available online. So we have implemented a permitting software that's we are working off of. Right now it's a soft rollout. We haven't opened the self-service component yet, but we are now using a new permitting system that's tied to each APN, so we have every record for that parcel attached to every property in the city. So with that, we're developing some guidelines that will be eventually posted to where it's a walkthrough of what to do available online to anybody to access at their own leisure rather than having to phone a staff member at the city. It also ensures that the instructions that are going out are consistent and it's not a he said, she said kind of story. So that is upcoming and will be rolled out along with the self-service portal. The sign inventory is something that was last done in fiscal year 2008-2009. So Sophia has here what it looks like. So it's literally a binder. Yeah, sure, passed around. It's a paper version rather than a digital version. So yeah, and there's obviously a lot of signs and they change, and a sign inventory requires not only a one-time effort, it also requires somebody to maintain. So every time a business changes, you have to remove a sign that's going away from the inventory and attach a new one. The digital,
So that is maintained that way?
Yeah, so this has not been maintained since, they did it as a one-time effort in 2008, 2009. It has not been consistently updated, so it's not something that we can rely on.
But it would also be digital in the future.
Right, so now that we have this digital platform to where, as I said, every record to that property belongs there, it's also a lot easier to audit. So if we had two different business signs approved, we can catch that a lot easier
And they're different
in the system.
families, I guess, of the signs, so they're from the large signs to small, and all places in between. So you can really categorize them into 10 groups and come up with, the scope of the work necessary to do one group. I mean, to do the largest signs or whatever is that, I'm not sure.
It would depend, yeah. I mean, the sign ordinance is pretty precise about
It sure is. No, it's very
what kind of
comprehensive.
signs are allowed and where they are allowed.
Yeah. I have a question about that because, again, this is done, this sign ordinance that we have in the code now is how old?
Sophia, do you remember the date? I want to say 2006.
Yeah, 2006.
Okay, 2006. Wasn't there a lot of work done on the sign code in the last couple of years?
No, there were minor revisions that were never fully approved. There were some RFPs issued looking for somebody from outside to come in and do that work for us. Was one application received to the first RFP, which was about 3 years ago, and
Okay.
I think it wasn't a quality application, and we tried to do that again about 2 years ago, and there was no application.
Somebody indicated to me that there had been a fair amount of work done on a revised draft of the sign code, and but it was never adopted.
Correct, yeah, that is my understanding too, and that's a whole other conversation about
Okay.
because there's lots to say there too, I'm
Okay,
sure.
well, I just didn't know if that was something that had any lasting value or something that you're really looking at, starting at square one. Obviously, we're looking at, and I'm sure signs are, take up a lot of your time for enforcement, because you get a lot of phone calls from angry retailers who are trying to stick to the rules, and they see interlopers who are doing whatever they want in the Wild West or whatever.
Right. Yes, signs definitely take quite a bit of enforcement. Obviously, signs are part of the feel and look of Solvang, so those have been important enough to have a sign ordinance that's being enforced. But yes, with this digital inventory, it would be a lot easier for us to track what sign is approved for what building. So that's...
What is the fees associated with someone wanting to put up a sign?
Sophia, have that number?
It is $392.
How much money does that generate in the course of a year in Solvang?
We don't know yet because we just implemented the new fee structure.
Okay.
And then there's also another fee for exempt signs, and it's, I think, $192 or $196.
A year or once?
Every time they apply, they have to pay a fee.
But it's a one-time fee, it's not
One-time
like,
fee. It's not annual,
recurring.
yes.
Yeah, not recurring.
It's not a fee.
Yeah. Okay.
One other kind of difficulty with signs that we're finding is that some of them were, so to speak, grandfathered before. So that's another aspect that needs to be noted in whatever inventory. There's a few aspects that we will need to clarify and work on. For example, the flags have been something that we need to address and clarify just what's allowed and what's not, because it's a little bit confusing in the code right now.
Okay.
So, the city, you could recommend as a DRC, and we can talk to Eddie about his enforcement efforts. You could recommend, updating the inventory and actually having it now in the new system, which will be easier to maintain as we go forward, but it definitely would be a one-time effort. Without that, it's a lot more challenging to consistently ensure that everybody that has a sign out there actually has an approved sign. And then, of course, code enforcement is our venue for bringing those who are not in compliance. We are primarily a complaint-based system. We do like to, we don't guarantee that anonymous complaints will be responded to, just because there is a difficulty in ensuring that it's a valid complaint. But we do reserve the right, and especially when it comes to something like the TRC and the design, to enforce more proactively. So it's not limited to the complaint-based system. And then what we are recommending here with the staff approval is just that there are certain instances where staff could approve to expedite the process at staff level.
Yeah, you have a couple recommendations, staff recommendations there. Personally, they seem terrific, and I think those are some that I think we should, look at motions tonight regarding. And then I'm not sure what it's important to get our arms around this and other, code enforcement issues. Eddie, what are your biggest challenges?
You want to come up?
Sure.
Thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate your time.
Well, you have a lot of people that have these temporary signs, like they call them breadboard signs that are around, and 100% of these people complain that they're not seen. They're in these little shopping centers and they're not seen, and they claim that if they don't put them out, their business and their profits go down. But most people are compliant. There's a lack of, once you contact them and tell them to get rid of these or send them a letter or whatnot. But there is a lack of like directory signs in some of these businesses. So, I always talk to these tenants when I do this and suggest they talk to the property owners about permitting a directory sign. And but we get a lot of these, some of these signs that we have, the breadboard signs, the menu signs, that's an actual menu sign that's not encroaching on city property are allowed. But some businesses have multiple signs like that are on private property. And so that's kind of an issue that, I wonder what to deal with at times, because there's one business owner in particular that has probably 4 or 5 of them around, and we've confiscated signs that are encroaching on city property and fined him, but there's still other signs that are kind of piling up, and then attention-getting devices. Some of the we're dealing with one property that the property owners have kind of let it run down, and they have let a lot of the tenants have these signs, and then they have display cases on the wall, and some signs are not permitted as well that we're finding that these businesses move in.
I suppose it's been a challenge with the COVID over the last couple of years, where people's resources to comply aren't there.
Yes, and I think during COVID it was laxed a bit, so people have gotten used to this. So it's really hard to say, okay, it's time to reel it in. So and that would be kind of nice to see, like a date where we're going back to what we're doing or what we did before. So.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. Number one, you've got a tough job. This isn't a question, and it requires that kind of fine line between being the tough guy and being the diplomat. So I don't envy you that, but I hear that you're doing a good job with that. My concerns, in addition to the overall aesthetic of town, is a consistency of applying the rules. And right now, the reason this came up in part is because it's almost as though the conforming applicants are at a disadvantage because they're having to pay a fee and they're complying, whereas those who choose to work outside of the system, and there's a fair number of those, the implications, there's really not been much that has occurred, especially because of COVID. And as you note, that people got very comfortable putting their, I call them sandwich boards, but whatever they may be, that they're out on public easement. So there's lots to improve. Would it, and I also want to know how we can help you. Would it help if there was, it seems as though if the city made it very public, it goes in the paper, there's a hard deadline, and then they know that there's going to begin a more stringent enforcement. So they're forewarned, there's time for them
To comply.
to comply without penalties, and maybe there's a system where the first round is a warning that's followed by a very tight timeline for compliance, and if that isn't met, then you repeat. That, I know that sounds really difficult, and I feel like it's very important that you're allowed to be proactive, that it isn't just a complaint-driven system, because that is also really difficult to make it a fair system when it's complaint-driven. you need to be able to walk around and spot the most significant violations from code. But that brings us back to the actual codes and the ordinances that need updating, where there's gray areas. And I'm thinking that that might be another meeting where you could come back and tell us, these are the areas where I find it especially difficult because it isn't
Crystal clear.
right, it's not black and white.
Yeah, and there are those cases that are not crystal clear, and there's a lack of consistency. So that would be helpful to, you know, like these signs on property that's not on private property. That, well, how many of them can you have? If it's, you know, I realize you can have a menu, but you know what's enough.
Right, with the daily special that we're here, and I think what's interesting to me is that you noted that this is occurring in a lot of the smaller kind of nice little courtyards for which Solvang is known, and then it kind of falls on the landlord to be creating a centralized directory, and perhaps that's a property owner kind of communication. I look at Zena and staff because the occupants are, you know, clearly not necessarily the owners of the property. So it's meant to encourage cleanup by making more unified signage on the given properties, such as we've been dealing with the park building. Although they've got sandwich boards in the public easement there after all the signs I have noted, which was discouraging for me to see after the amount of time and concessions that were made, to see that there's still, you know,
Extra sign.
yeah, so.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I know I actually called one of the managers there that I guess came to the meeting and said that, well, she claimed that they were told that they could have them there temporarily until they got their permanent signs. So, but I saw that they moved them from the one little landing to behind the rails the last
Right.
time. So.
Is there ever a process where the applicant comes in, tries to follow the rules, sets it up, he pays the fee, and a permit is issued, where you or someone from the staff goes to the place, checks off to see that in fact they've installed the sign in the way that they've,
In other words, is there a compliance,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure you are. Are applicants that are given the green light on their projects, is there a follow-up to ensure that what they did is actually what they were permitted to do?
Would the building inspector be part of that?
The building inspector wouldn't be, they would only be looking at the building aspects.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, when there's larger projects especially going on, code enforcement officer and building inspector go out there together and kind of look at the entire property. So
But not necessarily, it sounds like there's not really a procedure where, you know, Dowdle Puzzle Store on the corner got their okay for their signs and that they put them where they said they were going to. It's kind of on the honor system once they're approved, sounds like.
it's pretty much an honor, but it is a pretty small area, so all of us notice it pretty easily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We notice, right?
Yeah.
But I think also, just because they comply on day one doesn't mean they comply on day 91. So I mean, I think that's the other point of this, is that obviously there's a behavioral, you know, we can get away with it.
Right.
And so that's I mean, I think that's this idea of outreach and respect for, you know, everybody's right to have an appropriate sign. You go through the process, you can have the sign, right? But if you continue, if there's no penalty, people will not change, they're not gonna change their behavior.
I think what bothers me is when there's been, in particular, the signs that are noted as non-compliant and they're still there. You know, and I'm not talking about from a short while ago, but from a significant amount of time.
And just remember that during COVID, things were a little different. There was no
Yeah.
committee, it was approved at
understand.
staff level.
And we're just reaching the other side of that, well, or whatever it may be at this point. So we absolutely understand that, and I think that makes it that much more important that some of this be defined now, so that it can be addressed now and move forward with a more clear path.
Yeah, there's a number of aspects to it, and that compliance is definitely one of those. I think the inventory, I think, is an important one, because that relates to not only those people that are trying to comply, which is what we're talking about, but to the people that have never cared about complying, frankly. And that's something that we ought to do, and it seems to me that can be approached, something less than comprehensively. I mean, that is in its various parts. There's different signs that are probably more intrusive, that are more concerning or whatever, and that's a group that costs a certain amount of money, and on down to the many more immaterial signs.
Yeah, is there a way to get that value
Well,
down?
that probably,
35,000.
the information for that may be there, where it is more digestible. I don't know what all the variables are, but that's a way to present decision packages, if you will, to the city council on, a bundle of resources associated with this part of the problem, rather than, okay, it's gonna cost $35,000 to do 100% of it. Maybe there is no logical way to disaggregate that group. I do think, before we get there though, I mean, you have a couple recommendations that relate to that one in particular I note and draw the attention of the committee to is in the middle of page 95, I think it is, 65 or 95. Go ahead.
Pat, I was just gonna say, I was just thinking about Eddie.
Yeah.
That Eddie's still here, because I definitely wanna
Yeah,
go back to
okay.
what you were saying, but because I think it would really help us as we go through the signed ordinance a little bit more closely at another meeting that isn't at 7:30,
Yeah.
2.5 hours into our meeting. If there's something that you in particular would like us to address, and maybe you aren't ready to, to say that right now, but to be thinking about that, and maybe you do have some specific things that you have in mind at this point. So.
The only thing offhand I'm thinking of, and I don't think that the exception for the menu signs specify how many you can have.
Yeah, I don't believe so either.
So, that's the only thing I can think of, because and not that many people do that, but there are a couple that, kinda.
Well, and you need to have a reference point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do appreciate your coming tonight, Eddie. We want to tell you how much we appreciate the efforts you've made and continue to make on behalf of the city. And please know that we share a concern and with you about this issue, as well as a desire to address the issues around sign ordinance enforcement and other parts of the city code. And I know you work on other areas as well as just you don't work on just signs. You do a lot of other things as well as working in compliance for us, and we appreciate that very much.
How many hours a week are dedicated at this time?
About 10.
Okay, see, I think that I would like to really have that be, maybe there's something that we can recommend as a committee that be incorporated into the budget that would increase the hours for compliance. And, I would love to see that there was I don't know, I think of Cal Poly or UCSB students doing some kind of a project that they would receive credit for that would be this sign inventory.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, let's figure out if there's a creative way of making it doable on some level and perhaps at a less expense. Because that would certainly make it a lot easier if you're just sitting there with your tablet or whatever and looking at all kinds of information that pops right up. And that can be addressed even with letters as opposed to physical visits as well. Would you be available if it were more hours a week. Not that it's my job at all to ask that, but, you know, it takes a special person to do it.
I would,
And you don't have to answer that if you don't want.
Yeah, I think that Xenia's the one to answer. Xenia's the one to answer that.
Let me say, we would love to have you be doing it more, not because that's, that we're looking for a confrontation, but that what's most difficult is the fair and equitable application of the guidelines and the ordinances. And right now, again, as I said, it's almost as though those who comply by putting down the money for the application and following through are, you know, in some way almost penalized monetarily, if nothing else, for simply following the rules, whereas everybody else, you know, those scufflaws who aren't are, you know, bypassing all that.
we had some ideas we talked about before, so we could.
So you can make general recommendations that you would like to see more enforcement, and we'll come up with potential solutions for that.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think part of the budget challenge also is, I don't know how our fees compare to other cities, our size and so forth. And sometimes it's not even the size. I mean, we have,
Do we want to let Eddie go, or?
Thank you, Eddie. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much. But I mean, that's the other issue is, you know, not only how much it costs, but how can that money be raised and offset by the function being funded? And part of that is, how does our rates compare, and how does our rates compare to other cities that are tourist-based?
So, we just did our rate study, and the rates were just updated. I don't recall, but we did do, comparisons surrounding here. Obviously, our sign ordinance is more complex, and it's also more important for City of Solvang how the signs look. Not every jurisdiction has that, but it's based on time to process the sign application. So code enforcement itself is not captured through our fee system. It's just an enforcement mechanism that comes from, it's basically paid by the taxpayers.
It's interesting though, because you would think that actually if you add a component of enforcement into the fee, then you're actually, it's like you're buying into making sure that your other people will comply as well. So it's worth that investment if you're the business owner, because then you know that there's money funded to keep people
But do you want to pay $650 to?
No, but I mean, it's a measure of ROI in terms of how much additional percent, like if it's 2 percentage points, right? Like, or something that's more manageable. I don't know, it's just
so we can only charge for what we can reasonably prove we expend. We can't make profit on that. So it creates a challenge in that sense. The component of going out and making sure that the correct sign, in compliance with the way that it was approved was installed, that's reasonable because it could be a step that's taken at every single occasion. But when it comes to just non-compliance, which is unpredictable, that is not something that we can just build into our fee system.
And you have one recommendation that says amending the fee schedule. You recommend amending the fee schedule to add the lower cost staff level sign approval if the DRC will recommend additional opportunities for staff approval.
So counter
how
approval.
does that cost more money?
It costs less. So what this says is if you were to recommend, and obviously it would take the process to go through to amend the sign ordinance, but if you were to make general recommendations that we could potentially work on and go to City Council with to amend the city ordinance to where staff could approve over the counter, that middle paragraph on page 95, the recommendation is that staff could approve signs that are replica of existing sign that meets all the same dimensions and design standards. That's just a really easy one, if it's the same thing as.
Both of those
before.
recommendations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So this should say you recommend amending the fee schedule.
Well, in the sign ordinance, right?
Well, it would basically be a new fee added that would segregate the sign approval to staff level rather than to
Okay.
DRC level.
Okay,
Obviously, this time would not be
Yes.
included in that calculation.
okay, great. And, okay. And the other recommendation, the ministerial is the same thing, is that right? So is that really the same?
It's over the counter, yes.
Over the
It's just
counter,
staff
yeah.
approval.
Okay. I'm open to a motion to recommend that the staff bring back, is this right? I mean, bring back an amendment to the sign code to permit allowing ministerial or over-the-counter approval by city staff when a new sign is a replica of an existing approved sign, et cetera, as laid it out here. Is that the motion?
You can make that motion. Correct.
And does that encompass the sense of what's recommended there in the next paragraph too?
Yes, we'll bring that forward.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna,
Are you looking for a motion tonight?
Yes.
Oh,
You can, let's see, actually, let me make sure that we are discuss sign regulations and designs, so we're not set up for an action item.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, I don't think we are, and I actually
It
feel
hasn't
like
been
it
noticed.
needs a little bit more conversation than we're capable of
Okay, that's fair
at this
too.
hour.
And the DRC in that sense also has the advisory capacity, so
Okay.
not the final approval.
And I think that maybe what we can say is that we have conceptual approval to move forward with that and bring it back to another agenda.
Okay,
Would that
fair enough. I think that's great.
appropriate?
Okay.
So when it comes to bringing anything back to another agenda, I just want to be clear. Is there any additional information you would want to see about this concept of staff approval, or what other areas of sign ordinance and enforcement you want to discuss at a future agenda?
I just don't, at this point, I don't have any comments.
I don't either.
That
Other
are
than
succinct.
what you have here, I think provides us a framework, but you know, if you think it's necessary to come here for us to take the action you'd like us to take to advance this issue.
I would like to think about it more because I
Yes.
wasn't prepared for this session of this evening. I got to that end of that
Yeah.
and I did not get to digest this. as
Right.
much, So
I concur.
Okay, so we'll just basically continue and
Yeah.
come back to this conversation.
Yes, I think that would be
Okay.
a good thing, yeah.
Okay, let's continue
Because
with
we
the
had
next time.
such a ambitious packet, as
Yeah,
I
we
said,
did.
I did not get all the way through.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Let's do that. Let's continue this though and agree that this is a subject that we have to address and continue, particularly if we're gonna be primarily responsible for the sign ordinance in the city. Because that is one of those that we're primarily responsible for, as I get. Okay, let's move on then. Any committee member comments other than those already made?
I
Please.
would just say that I'm gonna miss, I think, the March meeting, scheduled trip.
Okay.
And so I'd like to continue this to after, or maybe the next one because of that.
Very good.
Remind me the date of the March meeting?
March 17th?
Yeah, I'm out of the country.
Is it
Yeah.
17?
17th, yes.
I most likely will be gone on that date as well.
Okay. And we don't have any real applications in the queue at this point, as far as I.
We have 3
Okay, we have 3 applications in the queue.
for sign, 2 for signs and 2 applications for signs and 1 for colors, materials, lighting, and landscaping.
So you've got some important stuff.
Yes, and potentially a conceptual review of a development plan.
So there's a lot of business at the next
Can we
meeting.
possibly move it a week, push it back a week? Is that possible?
You can take a motion to schedule a special meeting instead.
Yeah, I don't,
The
That's
24th?
the 10th or the
No,
24th?
Later.
Later's the 24th.
yeah,
Well, then, otherwise I'll just have to miss it.
it's possible I can make the 17th, but I know I can't make the 24th.
Okay, I'm the opposite.
So we
You
would just
be
need,
here.
we would need a quorum, we would need 3 members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be
Yeah.
Esther.
Yeah,
Okay.
or Joy.
Yeah.
I do have a comment. First of all,
Mhm.
good news about the web rolling out with the applications, even if it's kind of the kind of, I can't remember, soft rollout that's more internal. So that's good. That's a big step forward and will serve so many different capacities. I do have a request for staff. When we look at our reports, I saw the Planning Commission report with the projects that had been approved and the ones that were coming up, and it kind of just, I would think that would be really
Yeah,
helpful.
that would be helpful for us, yeah, we were envious of that.
Yeah. And you know, I think back to things as mundane as the barber shop sign that with the thing going around. I have no idea what finally was resolved or not. I haven't physically looked.
Moving.
It's
It's
not
not
moving.
operating.
Yeah,
Correct.
but things like that, that would be really helpful to just have a follow-up. Yeah. And then it also, if you're projecting ahead, that you know something is anticipated to be coming up, especially when it comes to some major projects that might be in the future, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, good, I agree with that. Thank you. Any other comments from,
No, from me.
city staff comments? We have,
I think I'd make just one comment about the general plan, just to remind that it's not forgotten, it's upcoming. So the next step will be for Planning Commission and the City Council to approve a preferred land alternative after the GPAC meets next week and
Yeah.
makes their recommendations. The next phases will be reviewing each one of the elements. And so the design element, it's its own element, there will be its own product around that. Obviously, this committee will be very important for that. It's not one of the first elements in the queue that we're trying to get through, but it will be coming up in a few months. So just giving you a heads up that that's trickling up. It's not here yet, but it's definitely not forgotten and is moving forward.
okay, good.
So on that, I guess, in terms of preparation, is there anything that we could be doing before it lands in front of us in terms of research or homework or anything that we should be, I'm not excited necessarily about it just dropping in our lap.
Right, I concur.
Yeah, I would really love to understand what we're gonna be asked to do and then think through what are, what are our resource documents, what are our, I'm a planner and I would really like to have that
And
sense
it-
of,
well-
what that deliverable is really gonna require.
I think that's really a good point, because when we go to the GPAC meetings, we have very ambitious agendas.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
are, sometimes amazing that we're able to move through it. So anything we can do ahead of time. The other thing is my understanding that GPAC is not a Brown Act committee, which means that,
Right, we can get together.
yes, that we can get together and talk about it, and not necessarily,
Yeah.
all of us, but you can also come to the
Yeah.
meetings and weigh in and
Yeah.
add your,
Right, I think I'd like to make sure to touch base with our city attorneys on that and provide you with clear guidelines, because
Right.
there is a line of your part of responsibility, kind of purview
I
in
just wanted to make-
developing those.
I didn't mean that we would all 5 or 4
Right.
get together in advance of the meeting. I meant at the meeting that they could come and give their
Right,
input. Is that?
and at the meeting, what I'm trying to avoid is you, more than 2 of you providing the comments and kind of having that meeting of the minds in a non-Brown Act environment, when it's something that will be within your purview to approve in the future.
Okay.
So even though you're in advisory capacity and the final approval will be city council, you still have a lot of influence over the design element.
So you just got uninvited.
I think you just got uninvited.
We're gonna rely on you.
But I would like to respond to your comment, Jennifer, that that's actually a very timely and a very good comment. We do talk with our consultants for the general plan constantly and kind of tweaking the process on what works best for the GPAC, what works best for the committee. Obviously, each city, each committee is different in its makeup. So I think our approach at this point is that this committee will be pretty hands-on in terms of developing the design guidelines. So it may be helpful that we do at the next meeting have a conversation about that, how that process will work for this committee specifically, what resources we would have from the consultants, and sort of what exactly the expectations will be from this body.
Okay.
Thank you. It's, I think, really important because as we saw in our joint meeting earlier this evening, what happens with the GPAC is going to influence what is our general plan, which is going to become a blueprint for this committee in many ways going forward.
Correct. Okay, great. Anything more before the group? Thanks for your patience, everybody. It was a long session, but that's what we signed up for. The committee is adjourned. Thank you, Laser and Chelsea over there, too.